Welcome to another edition of Perspective 254. My name is Agility Ekesa. I'm going to start today's episode with a quote from the former President Uhuru Kenyatta. Remember him? That guy? Just by a show of hands, how many of you guys would vote for Uhuru today if he was to run against the current President William Ruto? How many? Oh, everyone? Everyone? I see you. Good for you, man. Anyways, back to Mr. Uhuru Kenyatta's quote. Corruption has become an accepted way of life. As individuals and as a collective, we have sacrificed our traditions, customs, and values at the altar of materialism. Rather than shining those who have made their world through illicit means, we celebrate them even in places of worship. And with these words, delivered on January 25th, 2019 at Bomas of Kenya, President Uhuru Kenyatta condemned the spirit and practices of corruption specific to Kenya's political elites. In 2015, President Uhuru Kenyatta declared corruption a national security threat and vowed to tackle the vice head-on. On several occasions, he declared that no one who engages in corrupt practices would be spared. But for Kenyatta's critics, the war against corruption was all about the 2022 succession battle. They viewed the president as going after politicians aligned with his deputy, William Ruto. One of the main challenges in combating the fight against corruption in Kenya is the lack of political will. During the campaigns ahead of the August 9th elections, the Anti-Corruption Commission linked a total of 241 candidates running for various political offices to corruption allegations. Among the list of 241 candidates, 55 people have been charged with criminal offenses, 3 have since been convicted, while 11 remain under investigation. The politicians who crafted the constitution ensured that they had a backdoor. The backdoor leaves us vulnerable to unethical leadership. In the run-up to that election, the then Deputy President Dr. Ruto claimed that his close allies were being targeted by the anti-corruption authorities for political persecution. According to Dr. Ruto, the government was using the anti-corruption authority and the police to intimidate his supporters, hoping to discourage them from standing with him during the elections. Fast forward to today, Dr. Ruto is the president of Kenya and one Rigathi Gachagua, aka Riggy G, is his underboss. Get it? No? Okay, I suggest you go watch a mafia movie or two. You'll get it. Anyways, freedom is coming was the mantra of President William Ruto and his successful election campaign in the last election. However, Baba, along with Senator Edwin Sifuna, who has since fashioned himself as a very sharp-tongued and eloquent critic of the Kenya Kwanza style of leadership, has something to say about this so-called freedom. This freedom was particularly fitting for many of Dr. Ruto's cabinet secretary nominees facing criminal and graft cases while awaiting parliamentary vetting after the then Director of Public Prosecutions, Noordin Haji, withdrew a string of graft charges against a bunch of them. The recent developments in corruption cases linked to the President Ruto's allies have sparked conversations about the integrity of the judicial system and the fight against corruption in Kenya. Soon after Kenya Kwanza and Ruto won the elections, his allies started reaping the benefits of having supported him in the hotly contested elections. Several corruption cases tied to President Ruto's allies were withdrawn, squashed, or just simply collapsed in the halls of justice. Top on the list of the beneficiaries was none other than Deputy President himself, Rigathi Gachagua. Gachagua, who had a pending 7.3 billion case against him, suddenly had the case withdrawn by the DPP. The Director of Public Prosecutions, Noordin Haji, suddenly realized there was a lack of sufficient evidence to withhold the charge and therefore decided it was only wise to drop the charges. This is a theme that will feature again and again and again in several of these dropped cases, as the good Mr. Haji suddenly realized that he did not have sufficient evidence to sustain most of these charges. Poof! Just like that. And a 7.3 billion corruption case that had been languishing in the courts of justice disappeared. Magic. Well, I guess Mr. Haji figured there was no need to worry the deputy president with small matters like corruption cases when he had a president to deputize. Others on the long list that were free thanks to Mr. Haji are businessman Humphrey Kariuki saw his 17 billion tax evasion charges quashed by the High Court, and his factory, which had been shut down by police, reopened. The Anti-Corruption Court acquitted former Kenya Pipeline Company Managing Director Josan, who had faced charges related to 1.9 billion Kisumu oil jetty due to lack of evidence. lack of evidence. The Director of Public Prosecutions also withdrew 2.5 billion in tax evasion charges against Mary Wambui Muigai, another ally of President Ruto. Mary Wambui Muigai has since been appointed the chairperson to the Communications Authority Board. She is also referred in some quarters as Wambui Waruto or something like that. Aisha Juma, the Cabinet Secretary for Public Service and Gender, who is also a very close ally of Ruto, for lack of evidence. Ms. Jumwa was in the corridors of justice over claims of misappropriation of 57 million shillings from the Malindi CDF kitty. Former Samburu Governor Moses Lanokulal, who had been shortlisted for the position of Principal Secretary. The ex-governor had been charged with conspiracy to commit an economic crime by receiving 84.6 million shillings from the county government to supply fuel to Samburu County government. And then there was an out-of-court settlement that was reached with the complainant in an alleged rape case against Agriculture Cabinet Secretary nominee Mithika Linturi. Former Kenya Power Managing Directors Ben Chumo and Ken Tarus and the company's former managers over failure to comply with the procurement laws, among other claims, in the purchase of transformers worth 400 million shillings. It's like watching dominoes fall one after another. And it's making people wonder if there's been some pressure not to charge these allies of Dr. Ruto, or if there's been some meddling with the role of the Director of Public Prosecutions. The moves point to the dramatic shift in power in the DPP and DCI, both of which had allegedly been used by the former President Uhuru Kenyatta to target Ruto's allies who were linked to corruption and graft situations. In the list of the president's allies who have found themselves in crosshairs with the law are former Nairobi Governor Mike Sonko, Sirisia MP John Waluke, South Mugirango MP Silvana Sosoro, Kimilili MP Didmas Barasa, former Treasury Cabinet Secretary Henry Rotich, former Sports Cabinet Secretary Richard Echesa, Samson Cherengai, Muthika Linturi, Wilson Kogo, Nelson Koech, former Governor Okot Bado, Dennis Itumbi, Oscar Sudi, Samuel Buru, Silvanus Osoro, and so many others. The list goes on and on and on and on. It is long and endless. In this group, only Mr. Waluke has been convicted after a magistrate's court found him guilty of defrauding the National Cereals and Produce Board of 300 million shillings. He was sentenced to serve a total of 67 years in jail or pay a fine of 727 million shillings. He is currently out on a 10 million shilling bail pending a hearing on his appeal. And just to bring it all home, this hit the headlines a couple of days ago. The former Kenya Medical Research Institute, KEMRI, Managing Director David Koech, jailed in 2021, is among 37 people pardoned by President William Ruto following the recommendation of the Advisory on Power of Mercy. Dr. Koech was sent to jail for 6 years for corruptly acquiring 19.3 million shillings when he was the institution's boss in 2006. Dr. Koech had written to the president in September last year, pleading to be forgiven. The former KEMRI boss maintained that he had repaid the money, 21.2 million shillings, but I was jailed nevertheless. First of all, just for the record, I am not much of a lawyer, but I don't think that's how it's supposed to work. You don't just get to steal public money, and then when you get caught, you offer to pay it back and walk free. No, that's not how it works. Anyway, is that how it works? Yes, no? I don't know. Somebody please let me know, because I am not much of a lawyer, but I doubt that's the case. Corruption cases against William Ruto's allies, worth close to 30 billion shillings, have either been withdrawn or quashed in the recent past, turning the spotlight on the prosecution and investigative agencies in the fight against corruption. Well, all this is raising some serious questions about the prosecution and investigative agencies involved in the fight against corruption in Kenya. Raila Odinga obviously has something to say about this whole situation. This is what he said. Recent developments in which the Director of Public Prosecutions has moved fast to drop cases against government officials and the willingness of the judiciary to dance to the tune of the executive point to the fact that as a country, we are flirting with lawlessness. In addition to all these charges getting dropped against Dr. Ruto's allies, some of his other close associates also seem to be reaping their own rewards in a different way, mainly in the way of governmental tender awards. The president's senior appointees, close allies, and their relatives have bid and won multi-billion shilling contracts in the 9 months that the Kenya Kwanza government has been in power, shining a spotlight on the tenderpreneurs of the new administration. Firms associated with Communications Authority Board Chairperson Mary Wambui, remember her? Yes, the one whose corruption case mysteriously got dropped by the DPP for lack of evidence. Yes, that one. Belgut MP Nelson Koech and Kenya Revenue Authority Chairman Anthony Maura were among the influential bidders to the lucrative contracts recently advertised by the various government agencies. Nightingale Enterprises Limited, which has links to Ms. Wambui, is one of the firms that the Information and Communications Technology Authority has awarded contracts for laying of fiber optic cables and related accessories. As for Mr. Koech, the Belgut MP, a company owned by his wife, Chepkurui Kones, has been awarded a 1.2 billion contract to repair sections of Mombasa Road, Uhuru Highway, and Waiyaki Way that were damaged during the construction of the Nairobi Expressway. Mr. Koech is a UDA MP and chairman of the powerful Department Committee on Defense, Intelligence, and Foreign Relations. The fight against corruption in Kenya had been a key focus of President Uhuru Kenyatta's administration. This apparently was a major cause of friction between the president and his then deputy, Dr. Ruto, who saw this as an attack on him and his allies. However, despite the government efforts, this problem of corruption still persists. The government has implemented several measures, including the establishment of anti-corruption agencies and the enactment of anti-corruption laws. However, these measures have not been entirely successful due to various challenges. The culture of impunity in Kenya also contributes to the persistence of corruption. Many people believe that they can engage in corrupt practices without facing any consequences, which only encourages corruption in the country. Corruption is a multifaceted phenomenon, which is evident both in the political administrative area, where we see things like ethnically biased government recruitment, bribes in infrastructure contracts, embezzlement of public funds, and biased public policies. On the other side of the coin, is the citizens' interactions with the frontline public officials, where the culture of giving and receiving bribes, called shai or kitu kidogo, in exchange for public services or to avoid punishment, is the norm. It is the order of the day. It is difficult to implement the fight against corruption in this very complex landscape. In addition to the judiciary, there are three main institutions working together to reduce corruption practices in the public sector, particularly embezzlement: the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, the Office of the Auditor General, and the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. The Anti-Corruption Authority is responsible for collecting information on corruption in the public sector. This information comes from the press or direct testimony from individuals or local or national government members. The Office of the Auditor General has been appointed since 2010 to audit public institutions' accounts, including the national government, the counties, parliament, and political parties. The DPP, which has been in existence since the 1990s, is responsible for arresting public figures accused of various crimes. The commitment of these oversight institutions in recent years has been somewhat evident, although it's only a drop in the ocean. For instance, the Anti-Corruption Authority can boast of having been involved in recovering illegal assets in the region of $271 million since its inception in 2003, and conviction of more than 290 people charged with corruption. Additionally, the fight against corruption is also widely publicized in the local and national press, informing citizens about the integrity of their leaders and the level of their wrongdoing. Nevertheless, the lack of convictions of the so-called big fish, a popular expression describing just how few key political and economic figures at the heart of the corruption network is a major factor in the fight against corruption. Many politicians and government officials are involved in corrupt practices, making it very difficult to hold them accountable. Moreover, the judiciary, which is supposed to play a key role in the fight against corruption, is also plagued by corruption itself. Another challenge is the lack of effective enforcement of anti-corruption laws. Despite the existence of these laws, their enforcement is very weak, and many corrupt individuals often go unpunished, as the case of these guys. Kenya's competitiveness on the world stage is held back by high corruption levels that penetrate every sector of the economy. A weak judicial system and frequent demands for bribes by public officials leads to increased business costs for foreign investors. Widespread tax evasion also hinders Kenya's long-term economic growth, and fraud in public procurement is also very rampant. In conclusion, while Kenya has made some progress in the fight against corruption, much more, way much more, still needs to be done. The government needs to strengthen its anti-corruption agencies, enforce anti-corruption laws effectively, and foster a culture of accountability and transparency. Only then can Kenya effectively tackle the problem of corruption and achieve sustainable development. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we come to the end of our show for tonight. Let's not be corrupt. Until next time, this has been Agility Kesa. Cheers.